This morning we're here to release the results of a survey of likely voters in Texas that was commissioned. It was conducted by David Hill of Hill Research Consultants. We set out to gauge the public's perception of the insurance market as well as their support for pro-consumer insurance reforms like prior approval of insurance rates, requiring uniform standards for policy forms, making the insurance commissioner an elected position, and ending unfair practices like insurance credit scoring. Joe Sanchez with AARP is here. Joe, did you want to say a few words?
Good morning. My name is Joe Sanchez. I'm an Associate State Director of Advocacy for AARP of Texas. And I'm here today because insurance reform is one of AARP's top issues this session. Today's opinion survey poll confirms that many of the 2.5 million AARP members in Texas have been telling us for many, many years that the insurance reform is needed and we need to do something about the high insurance rates in this country, in Texas. Today, as premiums remain inflated and coverage options continue to be whittled away, Texas homeowners are getting less and less for the insurance premium dollar, insurance premium dollar. In short, we are paying for more for less, and Texas families deserve better. We cannot allow the insurance companies to run the show in our state and be left with the highest homeowners insurance rates in the country. It's great to be number one in football and basketball and everything else and all, but when you pay the highest insurance rates in the country, that's not what's needed. Many of our members, of course, are on fixed incomes, and they are struggling to be able to make ends meet and pay for the coverage that they need. Thank you.
Before I hand it off to Dr. Hill to walk you through the results and some of the key findings, let me just say one thing. Last fall, myself and a couple of members of my staff got on an RV and crisscrossed the state to raise awareness about these issues. And along the way, we met Texas families who are struggling with an economy in free fall, healthcare costs that continue to rise, and housing and credit markets that are in shambles. Talking to these families from all across our state is what prompted us to commission this poll. We had a pretty good idea how folks felt about these issues. It's not going to surprise anybody that people feel like they're paying too much for their insurance, but we wanted to find out for sure just how they felt. So the results of this poll should send a strong message to the legislature. Insurance reform is a fundamental pocketbook issue, and Texas families need their lawmakers' help. We thought long and hard about who should conduct this poll, and we chose Dr. Hill for two reasons. One, his reputation is impeccable. Anybody you call who's ever done work with him has nothing but positive and good things to say about his professionalism and the high quality of his work. And two, he has a strong GOP pedigree. He took great pains to ensure that each issue was objectively described and that our opponents' positions were fairly represented. So with that, I'll ask Dr. Hill to come up and say a few words.
I want to say two things just before we sort of go into some of the nuts and bolts of this. In addition to thank you for Texas Watch for having us here today to discuss the results of this. One is that, as he mentioned, that I think one thing that's notable about this survey, and I enjoyed working with Texas Watch on it, is that we have found over time that the best way to get insight into issues like this is to ask questions of a form where we say some people say one thing, some people say something else, where people get a chance to sort of hear the same kind of conversation they might hear at the barber shop or at the park bench about what the pros and cons are. And I think if you go through these and you see it, I think, you know, obviously people can hang on this word or that word and want to maybe change this or that. But in general, it's clear that through the totality of this that people heard a balanced presentation from both sides, and that gives us greater confidence that the result that we see at the end of this holistically gives us a real portrait of where Texas stands today. Just to give you some of the background on this particular survey, we did the interviewing in early February. It was a statewide survey of 600 voters across the state, and including homeowners and renters as well. One of the questions that we asked them, just to understand the factual background that people might have about these issues, was where they thought this might rank in terms of homeowner insurance rates. And what this chart represents here is sort of their rating. For instance, some people thought that we were number one, but a quite small percentage of the population. See, most people were sort of toward 18th or lower in terms of insurance. we're competitive as Texans, and we always want to be number one, or in this case, number 50 would be number one, and so maybe there was sort of a bias to see it that way. I would say that in some sense what I see here as a statistician is kind of almost a kind of a randomness. People really don't know exactly where and if forced to guess, they want to follow their chauvinistic preferences and think that we couldn't possibly be the highest in something that would be a negative. And so the skew is definitely in the wrong direction, saying that people don't have a real good sense of this. Then we asked them a series of also just agree-disagree questions, and these were all, again, balanced. If you look at the whole sequence of questions where we would ask some that would be, you want to think of pro-insurance industry, pro-consumer reform perspectives, but this is just one that sort of captured in, just to go over just a broad point, agree or disagree with higher premiums, larger deductions, and expanded exclusions. It seems like we're paying more and more for homeowner insurance these days while getting less and less in return. A good barbershop, kind of what people might hear on the street corner, kind of a statement. And you'll see overall 84% agreed with that, only 12% disagreed. And what's important is when you look at the sort of crosstabs here, you see that and this is typical of what you see throughout this survey, is there's broad consistency between Republicans, Democrats, different parts of the state, in terms of this being a problem. So here's 74% of Republicans agreeing, 87% of independents, 93% of Democrats, all regional areas of the state, again, quite high. But a variety of different policy prescriptions, potential reforms, and would describe to people sort of what the current situation is and what the argument would be for that, and then the alternative or proposed change system. You see here we've said some people think we should keep the current rules that allow companies to file rate changes with the Department of Insurance and then immediately put them into effect. They say giving companies this flexibility encourages competition, gives customers more choices, and will eventually lead to lower premiums. So a pretty spirited sort of sell for the status quo. I know there's a couple of power words in there. Choices is a very important word to consumers, and competition is generally would be something that would be a very sort of positive. But then we get there to say other people think we should change the system called prior approval, which will require companies to submit for review and justify rate increases in insurance before they go into effect. They say current rules currently aren't lowering prices, and a new streamlined review process would still encourage competition while protecting customers before they are charged too much, not just afterward. So given that sort of choice, we find 72% favoring the proposed change and 72% supporting the current status quo. And again, whether people understood every nuance of that, what it does say is there's an enormous kind of reservoir of support for change from the current system. And so even if you don't sort of follow every little nuance or detail of this, or even if you might change one tweak of something, it says certainly the current system doesn't have much of a constituency. And then finally, is we're standing in the state capitol today. Ultimately, these issues often come down to leaders' perceptions of sort of like, well, if they march in this direction or they march in that direction, is someone going to follow? And suggest is that if legislators provided some leadership in terms of reform on some of these insurance issues, that they would find phalanx of voters marching after them. In terms of your local state senator or representative, would you be more likely to vote for them or less likely to vote for them in the future? Forms like prior approval, direct election, neutral review, all of which we defined in the survey in uniform standard. And you'll see 71% said they'd be more likely to vote for that representative, 14% said less likely. And again, you see the numbers are consistent across the electorate geographically in terms of partisan groups. So in general, people seem to have made maybe not a very sophisticated, nuanced, detailed kind of response to each one of these, but it looks to me like people have made a standing, broad-based decision that we need change in insurance today and in the state of Texas, and they're likely to support a raft of reforms, whether it be precisely these or others as well. And I'll